Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to Awake Minute by Minute podcast. This is minute 45. Today, I'm, as usual, with Chris and Mike. How are you doing, Chris?
Good day. Doing very well, thank you. Doing very well.
Can you do your best Australian impression?
G'day, Mike. G'day, Mike.
G'day, yeah. Nice.
G'day to all the Australians listening, yeah.
How's Mike?
I'm good. We had a holiday in the US yesterday, President's Day. I noticed that it's very selectively celebrated. So, for example, a lot of people were off work, but my school didn't care about it, for example.
Yeah.
Chris, how was energization this morning?
Absent, but the meditation was good. I'll say that much.
Did you do the quick one?
The quick
quickie.
energization?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
You can do the quick one even whilst sitting before your meditation. In fact, you should do that anyway.
Yeah, I should. Yeah.
You know which one I mean? The tensing your whole body.
Yeah. No, I've been working in with my workout plan, and I slept in this morning, and then I had to pick meditation and energization. Yeah.
I really do intend to make you feel bad. So I think I've achieved my mission.
No shame, just motivation. I'm presuming yours was fantastic. Yeah.
What was mine like? Yeah, no, it was really good. I had an extra long Hatha yoga session and then energization. Anyway, how are you doing, Mike?
Yeah, so for the viewers, it's morning here. So I've not done my meditation yet. I did a certain preparatory exercise for Kriya and no EEs yet, nothing. So.
Okay.
Recording, yeah.
Interestingly, with you know how Mahasamadhi told us that you should do gross exercises, i.e. Hatha practices, and then go to more subtle, i.e. energization, and then even more subtle, i.e. Kriya. He said you should do it in that order. And then I thought I'd put that to the test recently because like I found that some of my Hatha practices take like an hour. And like if I'm then doing energization and then I'm doing my Kriya practices, I'm already like 1.5 hours sometimes into my practices before I even start meditating, at which point I'm like, I lose a bit of motivation. Yeah. So I thought, is this really the right order? Obviously, me losing motivation is more down to me than how my practices are, my own weaknesses. But I thought, is this really? Let me test it. So I tried to switch it around, and for the last like 3 days, I tried to do my practices first, energization, and then practices first. And then like my stomach was feeling really heavy during meditation because of the previous night's meal. Obviously, I may have ate too much, but I didn't think I ate too much. But then I noticed that after the Hatha yoga that I did, my stomach had completely like settled down. Whatever was going on had completely settled down. So I thought, that must be Guruji telling me, no, Mahasamadhi was right. You do your Hatha practices beforehand. And then that's what I did today. So I did a really long Hatha session, and then everything was just feeling really balanced. And then I started my meditation. Mike?
No, that's really good. I think he's right. Like it makes sense. But I feel like I always have to prioritize my exercises because I'm not always sure I have time for everything. So I always put my sadhana first. And even there, sometimes I do the EEs last or something because the thing is, did you ever do this checklist where you say like, I did this today, and I like meditation is like the most important one that needs to be ticked off, and then EE, and then I don't do much yoga like you do, but that would be a cool thing to add.
They someone at the center gave a really nice Christmas gift back, if you remember. Once they gave it to all like the volunteers at the center. They gave like a check sheet, like a book of check sheets for like every day's practices with your morning and evening energization, etc. And that's quite a good check sheet. I used it for one page, and then I didn't use it more than
They
that.
were like, perfect. You ticked it all.
No, more like the opposite. Like your flaws are like highlighted on paper. There's no hiding.
You miss a week and then you just don't want to look at it again for shame. For anyone listening, how did you get into the Hatha yoga? Because it's not something that SRF would actually give too much detail on. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and we've discussed in the past why we would imagine Guruji didn't emphasize Hatha in our practices. I think it was mostly because he focused a lot of his effort on the Kriya techniques and all of that, and the public speak, public lecture tours, etc. And B, because at the end, when he actually had time, i.e. when he was working on his writing, the writings he was doing and composing are like epic. There's no comparison or no parallel. Like his commentary on the Gita, and God talks with Arjuna, I've read countless like translations, and there's no comparison. And similarly with the second coming of Christ, these are epic works, which you dilute himself too much if he also focused on Hatha. But anyway, we're speculating there. But the monk, when I got interviewed for my Kriya, he told me, no, you carry on with your Hatha practice, don't drop it. And we know that monks also do the Hatha practice, so obviously we should, because Yogananda emphasized its importance as well. But sorry, Chris, long-winded answer. How I got into it was, there was a local temple at where I used to live when I was 16, 17. And in that temple, they taught classical Hatha yoga. And so it wasn't like a gym, it was actually, there was an invocation prayer, and it was a very spiritual practice, Hatha. And there I kind of dedicated myself to doing it every single day, pretty much for the rest of my life. And so I'm quite fortunate that I learned it through kind of like a spiritually quite grounded, the foundations of spirituality, as opposed to flat abs. And hence I've felt the felt the benefit of it and carried it on for my whole life, pretty much.
I think yeah. I'm looking to get into some Hatha yoga, but we'll be exploring my options, and I'll do some scientific testing, as you said, before, after meditation, before.
Yeah, I'd recommend, if you're going to do on the Surya Kriya, which Sadhguru's teachers teach very beautifully. So I used to do something called Surya Namaskar, and then I switched to doing Surya Kriya, which is a slight variation. It's almost like got Kriya practices embedded into the Surya Namaskar, which everyone knows. So I'd highly recommend it. It's a very powerful process. Yes, let's talk about minute 45. So minute 45 is really about kind of the directors talk about a few things, i.e. the civil rights movement, and the fact that it was really coming, it was drawing inspiration, that it drew inspiration from India. And Brother Chidananda says that people don't realize that Gandhi was a yogi, and he was applying nonviolence on a mass scale. And Stephanie Simon then says that Yogananda himself was a big supporter of Gandhi and lectured about him at Harvard. Robert Love comes in and says that he was, therefore, any promoter or any supporter of Gandhi meant that he was a person of interest, and government watch lists and all that kind of stuff, MI5 or whatever the equivalent exists in the USA, Secret Service, perhaps, I don't know. Varun Soni comes in and says, pretty much affirms that. And then Phil Goldberg comes in and talks about, who is this guy? Are you referring to Yogananda? Why is everyone following him? What's happening? Are they trying to overthrow the government? All that good stuff. So we've got 4 or 5 big players in the film. So this is a very good a good minute, as it's a reflection of the whole film, because it's got some deep stuff in there. Things like cosmic delusion is always snaring us through our ignorance. Then there's beautiful commentaries, and then there's, Brother Chidananda there that comes in and gives his 2 pennies worth. So it's got SRF view, it's got Yogananda's quote, it's got 4 or 5 very eminent speakers, 2 of which we've actually interviewed, Phil Goldberg and Varun Stoney. You can go through those episodes. And actually, I've started, especially with the Phil Goldberg episode, I've started chapterizing videos now. So they've got topics. So we'll start doing that slowly. We'll be able to chapterize all of our videos. So then you can click on an element of the video that you may want to watch, etc. So reflections on the minute. Yeah, that was my reflection. So we're going to talk about things like the civil rights movement, the independence movement, how they were linked. Civil rights in USA, obviously, and independence movement in India, many thousands of miles away, of course. Then we're going to talk about non-violence and Ahimsa and the Gandhian view of the world, Guruji's lecturing at Harvard, the topics he may have covered, and some of the pictures and videos they used, because they used a video of Guruji at a very fancy-looking dinner in his latter or final years. Mike?
Yeah, it's when I first heard about Gandhi when I grew up. Of course, I heard it also from my parents, but I feel like the Gandhi movie with Ben Kingsley kind of drew the picture for me in the beginning, and I don't think it drew it perfectly. It didn't show perfectly all the things that were going on and how I mean, it showed some violence, but not how violent it all was. But after reading the autobiography, I kind of understood what a great man Gandhi himself was, and how when Guruji visited him, like he writes a whole chapter about him, right? He talks to him and he visits him, and he calls him many times. He calls him a saint. He calls him a great politician. He calls him the liberator of India. And at that point, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think India was even independent yet, right? So he was still in the middle of the struggle. And it was just showing that when India needs an avatar to come and free it, then one will come, and he will use methods that are very different than we thought were necessary, and it worked out, which is amazing. And like you said, it later inspired the civil rights movement in the USA.
Are you calling Gandhi an avatar, Mike?
I mean, if you call, what is so this is like a question I can ask you back to you, right? If someone is being called a saint, that kind of means he's free from the material plane, right? An avatar just means he already came here free. I'm not sure, like when I read Gandhi's Vita, that through his life he had to free himself. I feel like he always knew what he wanted, and he always knew what mission he was on. So that's why I would say that. You're right, but I didn't read him called like that anywhere. That's true.
Certainly, when I think personally, when I think of Gandhi, I think of him in a very elevated state. And I was so thankful that Guruji included a whole chapter on him, because it kind of confirms confirmed my my elevation of him in my own mind and my own heart. But because I presume I'd thought, because I'm such a patriotic Indian, and a big, Indian history has always been very, very touching to me. So I always thought my affinity to Gandhi was because of that. So I thought I may be susceptible to having my view of him may be clouded because of that. But Guruji then putting him in the autobiography really, for me it cemented that for me, because Guruji, if he has Guruji's endorsement, then what better endorsement can you have than that of an avatar? Mike, do you want to come back?
Yeah, this is always something that I would never know, right? Like there's a lot of great people, and I'm not in a position to say, oh, this person was a great realized master or not. But if Guruji says something in this direction, then for me, it's like the discussion's over. So
yeah, we're going to talk heavily about Mahatma Gandhi in minute 60 when there's videos of him, of Guruji going to visit Gandhi. We'll talk about Mahatma Gandhi in significant more detail. But today we'll just focus on really what the message was saying, what the messages were from the minute. So it starts with Gandhi and, you know, the civil rights movement being inspired by the independence movement. The independence movement, of course, was a probably 150 to 100 year campaign that the Indians really embarked upon. Really, it started with I'd say the political or the educated elite in India, the Indians, not the British, obviously, when they ruled in the 18 and 1900s, and it then slowly became public, as in a national movement, when everyone got on board, i.e. the members of, you know, the society, all members of society. So yeah, there's in this image, there's this fantastic image of Gandhi in a newspaper, and it's got him sitting down looking at some papers. He's like dressed in just a loincloth, and he's got those classical Gandhi, you know, moon-eyed glasses, and he just looks so saintly there, doesn't he? You can see his ribs. There's a bit of a yogi-esque element of him. So it's a beautiful image there. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, if you look at this picture, you see basically a sadhu, right? You don't see a warrior, and I mean his whole philosophy of nonviolence is Ahimsa, right? Is so powerful because it is the moral high ground that he was always on, and from where he was always making his actions. And when you see a picture like this, you look at him and you go like, oh my God, this guy, he's a master of himself. But it also shows that India has this kind of, I'm guessing back in the day, a British person looked at this picture and thought, who is this? This makes no sense to me, like some peasant. And Indian people looked at him and thought, oh my God, he's a great master, right? Yeah. This makes such a difference, doesn't it?
How would someone see him now, Chris, just seeing that picture randomly? What would you see him if you were independent?
You know, whenever I read it, Gandhi arrested on charge of sedition, and the word sedition isn't really used much these days. Yeah. So I actually I googled it, and it's conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority or state of a state or monarch. And in some ways, I think that people today would be a lot more receptive to Gandhi, from my view, and maybe sedition itself. There's an educated population now that wants to be independent in free thinking, whereas back then, like this made, like, that word made the headline. And I think if that very word made the headline in that context, I think people would rebel against that. There's a more rebellious nature, I think, now that people are more decentralized and thinking for themselves, versus 100 years ago when Gandhi was in India.
But what did you think of that image of him, with the papers, loincloth, bold, ribs showing?
Well, I think it's been said, really. He's not in lotus posture there, I don't think.
No, I think just one foot, maybe half lotus.
He holds himself as a man with grace and somebody who's deeply caring and attentive. You can kind of capture that just in that image, in how he's holding himself. So yeah, everything you guys said, I was going to jump in to say something, but you guys beat me to the punch on Gandhi.
So Chris is sitting on the fence. He's not committing one way or the other.
He looks amazing. He looks very saintly. Yeah,
yeah, we got him. Let's talk a little bit about the independence movement that India kind of led, and Gandhi led, I suppose, because we know from Gandhi's autobiography, which is called The Story of My Experiments with Truth. And I'd highly recommend that for anyone who's interested in Gandhi. So the Ahimsa campaign was really a campaign that, you know, these political class kind of promoted, and it was really about non-cooperation with using non-violence itself. We're going to talk about non-violence as a concept a bit later, but non-cooperation, Gandhi would have picked that up when he was in the UK. So when he was in the UK, so it's an interesting analogy here, because you know, UK or the English wanted Indians to be educated the Indian way, you know, the English way, sorry, and Gandhi came to, you know, UCL and did law and became a barrister here in the UK. So he had a very British, you know, university and barrister education. So he came to the UK, and then he was very influenced by the British Labour Party and the trade unions and the power that they had. So when people would go on, you know, when workers would go on strike, that meant that, you know, corporations would be, you know, on their knees, and so he really transformed. He used that and then transformed it into a religious thing, i.e., a religious and a moral thing about non-violence, and applied it to a national problem, or a national for the Indian cause, i.e., the independence movement. And because he embedded the spiritual aspect of it, and we'll talk about ahimsa, non-violence, into it, he made this beautiful mix of non-cooperation with non-violence, with this really altruistic goal. And that goal for him in his life, he actually made it a self-transformation thing as well. So he linked, for example, independence to his own liberation, which is a completely, you know, it's a wild thing to do, isn't it? To link something that's an international political chess game and link that to yourself. So, for example, if and this happened often, England, you know, didn't fulfill a promise back in the day, Gandhi would say, "What have I done wrong personally that led me to be experiencing this defeat in my external activities, i.e., India's pursuit of independence?" So yeah, I thought it was quite beautiful that and ironic that England wanted Indians to be educated in the British model, and they got that. And then when they were educated, they caused the end of the British Empire. Mike.
That's a fantastic point you made there. That is something I am just realizing now, the similarity between a union strike and non-cooperation to overthrow a government or an illegitimate regime. That is super interesting. Another point you made is that the Indian independence struggle was already going on for over 100 years, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But it lacked the effectiveness that Gandhi brought in. Gandhi kind of gave the movement the right tools to succeed. And as long that people often think that non-violence is weak, and what the thing is, with violence, they would not have won. They would not have gotten the independence, because the British, they had power, overwhelming troops, military power everywhere. So if there was an uprising somewhere, they would have always been able to put it to an end. But this nationwide non-cooperation movement was something they were completely powerless against, and there was nothing they could do, and they had to admit defeat after a while.
Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, maybe reflecting on Gandhi himself. You know, whenever I think about him, I think of a man with incredible discipline. And I suppose it really, like, if I think of any element that he had that I would look to be, you know, key among many, is discipline. Because at the time, like Mike said, you know, the British Army and the aggression that they were able to deploy at any time to curtail any kind of rising which they did many times, would have incited a lot of hatred, a lot of violent tendencies, and it would have been easier for people to kind of take up arms in some way and have a violent uprising. But the discipline that he had to have to not go down that route and to not take up arms or spill blood was incredible, like really, really incredible. And I think that's what can really inspire people to say, oh, okay, well, with discipline and, you know, with faith and all the rest of it, we can make it work. Like I watched the 3-hour movie on Gandhi, which is incredible. And it did just strike me time and time again that there would have been people at the time, you know, speaking in his ear, trying to maybe recruit him into different means and take up more of a radical approach. He could have easily went into that, but he had such discipline to not do it. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And inspiration.
Interesting you make that point about violence. One thing that he did say was Ahimsa should not in any way be linked or compared with cowardice or being fearful and not acting through fear, i.e. being docile, etc., because of fear of consequences. He said, rather than, it's better, in his definition, it's better to pick up a weapon and fight than it is to run away from a battle through fear and cowardice, which is, that means that, you know, there's so many layers to this Ahimsa concept that it's staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mike?
I think Gandhi became quickly, when he moved back from South Africa to India, he became a very beloved symbol in India. And the British, they locked him up a few times, but they never killed him because they knew they didn't want to create a martyr. And I feel like martyrdom would have created a violent conflict that would have mobilized so many Indians, that would have also probably led to the British losing ground in India.
Yeah. He's a proverbial thorn in their sides, wasn't he? They can't get rid of him through conventional means. Even prison, like he putting him in prison actually empowered the people to fight harder, didn't it? It was just crazy. There's no way of them winning. It was a crazy time to be alive. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, you're right. Like putting him in prison motivated them to do more action to get him out of prison, right?
Yeah, and really cemented his cause. So if he said from prison, writes a letter saying, "Look, I'm in prison. You guys need to do this. The country's weight is on your shoulders. I mean, do you need any more inspiration than this guy can live in a palace, being a barrister in London, but he's wearing a loincloth like the poorest person in the country and living voluntarily putting himself in prison." Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many thoughts that come up about Gandhi because he was not just of course, the independence was his main cause, but also reforming the caste system, for example, in India, was a very big thing for him inside. So a lot of the people who felt disenfranchised by the caste system followed him because they felt like he understands them, loves them, and gives them a future as well, right?
Yeah. Right. So with that not so brief flurry into the independence movement, let's talk about its link with the what's it called, Mike?
The civil rights movement in America.
Civil rights movement in America, right? And one of the biggest proponents of that he's not mentioned in this minute, but of course everyone links him prominently to the civil rights movement, is Martin Luthar King. Let us share a small video with you before we proceed, and we can discuss it.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Yeah. Mike, tell us your reflections.
Like when I hear this, it's still sometimes the tears come, because it's just so, like, he didn't put any anger into his speech. He put facts in there and a legitimate desire of equality, right? That kind of everybody who heard this must have understood, must have heard, yes, I agree with this man. Even no matter what your race was, what your situation was. And he had a very powerful voice as well. And what he was referring to, of course, was he was standing in front of the statue of Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War to end slavery in the United States. And now 100 years later, look at the situation. We're still not where we want to be. There's still no equality. There's segregation in parts of the country. And his idea of a dream of an America where everyone is the same under the Constitution was so inspiring back then. And now, I mean, it is much better, but it's not finished. So these are still inspiring words. And the fact that he did the same thing also through nonviolence, it makes him a very inspiring leader.
Yeah, certainly. With especially you, I mean, he would have hoped that, you know, in the year 2021, there wouldn't have been a need for a movement of the take the knee campaign, for example. But clearly, there still is that need. There's still discrimination at various, you know, probably at every level of the society. Even though we've had a, you know, a black president of the United States of America, it's still there, isn't it? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, the problem seems to be that there was this very long time where African Americans were disadvantaged, and then you remove a lot of those hurdles, and then you say, so now we're all equal. But the economic outcomes, they don't change overnight, right? Those hundreds of years, they still happened. And so there's talk in America to make this process faster through means of, I don't know, everything's very controversial in America, of course, but yeah, let's see, let's hope, let's pray that America will be this country that has the same promise for everybody, no matter what race.
Yes. So we see, so let's draw this arc perfect that we started earlier. So Gandhi went to the UK, became, you know, educated in, you know, strikes, and then went to India. Civil disobedience became a thing that was linked with Ahimsa. Then Martin Luther King, we know that from his writings, he was a big advocate, a big fan of the Gandhian approach to bringing about change, and he then led this movement, led the civil rights movement, and it's still going, isn't it? It's still the work is still not done, and perhaps perhaps we can somehow through our prayers and through our own transformation and spiritual involvement, we can also support that cause. Yeah, so let's talk about non-violence then in that spiritual component. So I've got a few quotes here and I've taken them from God Talks with Arjuna. So Mike, do you want to pick up the non-violence card and read your first one?
To condone defensive force in certain circumstances is not to demean the superiority of spiritual power over brute force. Even a tiger in the company of a yogi filled with the love of God becomes a pussycat. Patanjali says, in the presence of a man perfected in Ahimsa, non-violence, enmity in any creature does not arise. Love your enemies is a central part of the teachings of Christ. This is not a sentimental dictum, nor a gesture merely to ennoble the giver, but expresses an important divine law.
Chris?
It reminded me of my favorite subject on the yugas. In the higher yugas, maybe this is an insight as to how mankind can, live in symbiosis with the animal kingdom, where at the minute I think it's quite a scary idea. Could you be walking with a tiger? Well, maybe not. But if you perfected this technique, let's say, of non-violence, there may well be a future where that those two worlds of the animal kingdom and humans can coincide and live in harmony.
Maybe. Hopefully one day we'll know that. Go on, Mike.
Like 6,000 years, yeah.
No, as in, hopefully we don't take that many years to become enlightened. And when we do, then we will know all things of the past and the future. Mike?
I love the point that he makes, that what we said earlier, right? That the spiritual power is not weaker than brute force, it is superior. And brute force is oftentimes not the way to victory. And I feel that point, a lot of people that had success in the 20th century, like we could also mention Nelson Mandela, they all used Ahimsa and they were all successful, whereas a lot of other independence movements failed, right?
Chris, part 2.
15 verse 2. The soul qualities that make man godlike. Non-injury. One of the 10 commandments in the Bible is thou shalt not kill. The prohibition refers to the wanton destruction of any of God's creatures, human beings, animals, plants. But the universal economy is so arranged that man cannot live without killing vegetables for food. Eskimos cannot live without eating seal meat. When it is an urgent matter of survival, a man is justified in saving his own more valuable life by killing fish and animals, which are lesser manifestations of divinity. Each day, millions of bacteria perish in man's body. No one can drink any liquid or breathe air without destroying many microscopic forms of life, and sometimes such organisms respond in kind.
This is a good parallel we can draw, because the purest veganism movement or the vegetarianism movement, the purest argument is that all life is created equal. Your life is worth the same as that of a cow or insect. But here, Guruji unequivocally says that man is essentially the highest or the most evolved being, but not in terms of like Darwinian evolution, but more over the spiritual evolution in our ability to perceive God and to put spiritual principles into practice. But if that spiritual man needs to kill to survive, then he should value that opportunity for spiritual unfoldment in this life more valuable than that life of that seal or whatever, that vegetable or whatever you may be killing. So I thought that was an interesting parallel, Mike.
I think I asked you that question many times before, but this brings it up again. So imagine you are like hungry and there's nothing where you are except for a cow, and you have a knife in your pocket. What are you gonna do?
Who are you asking?
Yeah, Priyank.
I'll ask Chris.
It would be rude of me to take your question.
Would I I probably still wouldn't, because I don't think I could. I would hope that Guruji intervenes before I have to commit such an act. But I was actually thinking about this recently, being crashed on a desert island or retiring to the Himalayas. I know it's easy to say it, but could you, through your kriyas, just keep deepening your kriya, keep deepening your practice, such that two things can happen, i.e. you get to the level of Teresa Neumann and others that live on sunshine. Because we've never really tried to it. We've heard about these spiritual concepts, but we never really try them, because in that area, in that space, you'd be forced to do it or you don't survive. Or secondly, just if you can meditate to starvation, if you're going to die of starvation whilst you're meditating, then surely grace has to come in at that point. And I know it's easy for me to say, but I would try to practice or use that opportunity to practice one of those two goals, or to realize one of those two ambitions. Easy to say, but Mike.
So you basically answered the question by saying you wouldn't kill the cow, you would instead meditate and hope that you would be able to be sustained by God's light.
That's right.
That's fair.
Is it too ambitious?
It might be ambitious. I feel like my problem is I probably also couldn't kill the cow. I like, in me, I don't have this feeling that my life is more important than the cow, even though it says here in the Bhagavad Gita. But I'm not sure I could do it anyways. So
why don't we say if it was there was 100 cockroaches, all high in protein, easily sustained, but that island's got 1,000 million cockroaches lurking around. What about then, Mike? Or is that the same principle?
I mean, ask me again when I'm really, really hungry.
Chris, same question with the cows first and then the cockroaches second. You just asked the man that's just after having his breakfast versus the man who hasn't eaten since breakfast. I think, I actually had a struggle with this concept at the higher end of what if, we were faced with a great evil on the planet where, another Nazi situation or something, God forbid, was there. Would you take up arms to defend what you would see as a better path for the benefit of mankind? And I actually talked about this with a SRF devotee, and she said, actually, this is you would condone it you as a spiritual act, because it is for the betterment of mankind and spiritual enlightenment. I struggled a lot with that concept. I really said to myself, well, how could not how could you know, but if you were wrong, that's quite a heavy price to pay. You would have to be absolutely sure 100% that you were right. But I suppose this is something that people have had to deal with in the past, in different wars gone by. But that's my thinking on it. Beyond cockroaches, could you take a human life if it was to defend a nation or family or something? It's a great concept.
I think Guruji said, he talked about patriotism and one's love for his country, and he even said, if they needed me to pick up an arm and to fight for the country, I would. So what is a righteous, if it is or isn't a righteous battle, you can only use your own judgment, but beyond that, it's down to God, isn't it? But if you're fulfilling your duty, whichever side of the battle you're on, then what more can God ask of you?
Yeah.
Anyway, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to continue down that road. Do you think I should first read the next section, because it kind of goes that direction? Yeah. Okay. In the Mahabharata, Ahimsa is referred to as a virtue entire, sakalo dharma. If righteousness be thus the criterion, neglect of action to uphold God's eternal laws of righteousness may be the cause of more harm than any non-malicious injury resulting from an act of obstructing evil. Method and motive are often decisive elements on the balanced scale of divine justice. During a visit to the ashram of Mahatma Gandhi in 1935, I asked the prophet of nonviolence for his definition of ahimsa. He replied, the avoidance of harm to any living creature in thought or deed. A man of nonviolence neither willfully gives nor wishes.
Wishes ill harm to.
Ill harm.
To other creatures. Yeah. So this is a good one, because in the Mahabharata we have two opposing armies. So in the Mahabharata we have the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and Kauravas are headed by essentially a material or an evil Duryodhana. And Duryodhana is symbolic as well. You can read about that. Their name is symbolic as well. And you can read about the symbology in God Talks to Arjuna. But he had, an army of 100,000 men. Now he was battling against Krishna. So they knew, everyone at that time accepted Krishna was God incarnated in that in that thing and in that life. But they were on the side that was opposing Krishna, and Krishna had actually made it that way. So Krishna, for example, Duryodhana, he offered Duryodhana two things. He said, either you can take me on your side and I'll be your personal counsel, as Arjuna was, or you can take my entire army, the Yadavas, the other, all of his kings, etc., and kingdoms that followed him. And Duryodhana, being who he is, didn't realize that the God can never lose. Any side that Krishna is on can never be defeated. He picked the army because he thought, if I've got an infinite army, there's no way I can lose. Now, everyone in his army, now in Duryodhana's army, now would you say, just because they're fighting against Krishna and they're fighting on the side of Duryodhana, means that they would then be committing an unrighteous, or their violence isn't justified? Krishna actually gave the army to the evil side. They still had to fight. And in fact, it even goes deeper and says that for a warrior, there's no greater spiritual opportunity than a battle, i.e. a war. And I know that's symbolic as well. And Krishna also says that any person, that pretty much is slayed by my hand is liberated, basically. I've ended that's their last birth. So if, for example, one of those people in the army decided, no, I can't battle against Krishna, then he's going to be reborn. He's back in he's going to be back in this body if he doesn't get liberated. So I hope that a little bit answers your question, Chris. I know you took it to the extreme, i.e. Nazism, but the example that we have with the Mahabharata is I think is a clear one. Mike?
The Mahabharata is like this amazing conflict, right? Where you really have the good tendencies against the bad tendencies, and all the symbolism in there. And yet I love how Arjuna and Krishna, they have to talk a long time before Arjuna is ready to fight, right? Because his first instinct is, I don't want to fight my brothers. I don't want to kill anybody. And he's essentially, he thinks a bit like us, right? Like he would much rather solve this in a non-violent way, right? And he also thinks, is it worth it killing my brothers? And then Krishna has to convince him, like, for pages and pages, right, of this war, and he says, because it is a just war, right? Because it's not a war of spite. It's not like something that is just for ego. It is a war that needs to be won in order for the order to be restored. And this is and like you said, I mean, if you fight on the side of the Kurus and you get slain by Krishna and get liberated, fantastic. I'd turn up for that.
Yeah. One thing that we should add, God Talks with Arjuna, Guruji says that Vedavyas, who is the author of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, he said he interwove an actual battle, i.e. the one in Kurukshetra, the one between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, with a metaphysical battle, i.e. one that each one of us has with us every day of our lives and through our whole life. So, for example, the metaphysical battle in that is that my past tendencies, so Duryodhana, Bhishma represents ego. So he had to, Arjuna didn't want to kill Bhishma because Bhishma is his grandfather, and the grandfather of all your evils is the ego consciousness. And Arjuna wasn't only seeing a relative, he was seeing his past tendencies, is the metaphysical element. So he doesn't want to slay habits that have taken him to where he is, because this is all he knows. He isn't at that state of a realized master as Krishna is. So the metaphysical aspect of what he doesn't want to be rid of, but Krishna obviously urges him to be rid of those things for the greater good of not of just Kurukshetra, but his own spiritual unfoldment and liberation. Chris.
These stories are epic, but if I was to look to a less epic example, there is a great example of this in the lessons, which I'll not go into detail, but the gist of the story is that there's a man who is a butcher in a marketplace, and he's spiritually enlightened, and he was asked, why are you a butcher? The response was basically, well, somebody will do it, so I'm going to do it with love in my heart, non-violence really in my heart. And I thought that was a really striking message, that society in certain times will have the needs for or demands for these sort of things. They're not going to go away like overnight, and somebody like that can step in that position and have their mind on God and do the action. And that's what it sort of says there. Its method and motive are often decisive elements on the balanced scale of divine justice. So that's what it made me think of, that if you can put your mind on God and still act in the world, what are you producing karma? How does that work exactly? So really interesting point, but just to kind of take it on to a more practical example of my everyday living.
Yeah, sure. Chris, do you want to read the last?
Sure. The Lord is Ahimsa. Correct me if I butchered that word.
Ahimsa. The Lord is Ahimsa.
Sorry, Ahimsa. I thought I did. The Lord is Ahimsa, the shelter from all harm, in whom there is no intent to cause pain or injury to any human being. Harm is the result of the misuse of free choice to identify oneself with the illusions of duality. He is truth, the singular reality, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, blissful blessedness, behind all cosmic appearances. In him there is no wrath, no desire contradicted in his desirelessness, self. The working of his laws are not punishments, but promptings of his love.
Indeed. So that is, again, from all of those were from God Talks with Arjuna. Do you want to, Chris, do you have a reflection on that before we move on?
I think really it sort of backs up what I was saying maybe in the previous minute to some degree. The singularity, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new, blessed, blissful, behind all cosmic appearances. The shadow and light of duality of Maya. I was thinking that everything is a play. You know, it reminds me of Yogananda talking about his vision of, was it World War II or World War I, when he was crying, you know, why is this happening? And the response was, you know, these are just scenes, you know, in a movie. So there is a lightheartedness to it, to the whole play, and not to take it too seriously in some sense as well. So that it kind of springs thoughts to my mind. In him there is no wrath, no desire, and this is all but a play for us to experience in the vastness of Maya.
Yep. Ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss with Sat, Chit, Ananda, of course. So we have now we have a scene of Guruji lecturing at Harvard, and it all looks very nice. He's got his robes, and there's a kind of a summary. It says like 1923, Harvard Crimson, Cambridge Mass. Gandhi held as a second Christ by all India, says Swami Yogananda. And then it says, people in India truly happy because truly spiritual. Pretty easy question, I'm sure, for you guys to answer, but does spirituality, does it equate to happiness, like straight away? Is there a direct correlation, Mike?
Pretty easy answer. I mean, yes, I think. A correlation doesn't mean it's directly connected. It's like you're more likely to be happy if you're spiritual. I would say 100% yes, especially if you mold your life to the image of a great guru like Yogananda. I feel like you will be a lot more happy, definitely.
Chris?
Yes, but it depends. I would say it depends on the individual's, you know, past life and karma, how much of an easy time, let's say, they might get to the perfection of the spiritual practice. So it depends on, as Mike said, maybe the teacher and your practice. Spirituality, a drop of it might give you temporary happiness, but and of course the goal is permanent happiness, blissful states. So yes, but it needs a lot of work as well to maintain it, to get to the absolute utopia version of what it means to be spiritual.
Mike?
I want to talk about the title that it says there, right? Like that you read at the beginning. Gandhi held as second Christ by all India, says Swami Yogananda. And this means something, right? So this shows you that India was seen as part of the British Empire back then. That was like their breadbasket, or where a lot of the raw materials came from. And here comes this Swami from India who is a patriot of India, you know. And I feel like even now, the idea that India was once this great country, that this great economy, this great power in the world is forgotten, right? And now he's just basically trying to bring to attention the vastness and the greatness of India. And I love that he's Indian and he loves his country. He loves India, and wherever he goes, he even, like this beautiful poem that he wrote about India that he cited on his last day. I mean, I love that he loves his country so much that he puts it out there when he can. And the second thing is, of course, Gandhi held a second Christ is also a big message, because I would assume if people read newspapers in that time, they would probably think Gandhi is this terrorist guy from India, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Western media would, but Indian newspapers, Indians to Indian newspapers reading, and they might get that. Chris?
I think it's a good comparison, actually. You know, India and America. It says here, you know, his aim is to conquer India through ideals, and lack of religious understanding in America, her undoing. And then it says people in India truly happy because truly spiritual. And when I thought about it, I suppose you might say that people maybe had less in India, but by correlation, they might have attributed more value to the spiritual side versus the material side, you know, when you look at America. And you might see people more happy because they have maybe less, because they live a more simple life, versus the complex, you know, life that people live in America. And we've talked about it in previous minutes, that people are quite unhappy, and more things don't mean more happiness. So materialism versus spiritualism, simplicity, happiness, yeah, there's a practical element to that as well.
Yeah, Mike?
I want to say something controversial. I'm not sure if you guys know this UN Happiness Index. Have you ever followed that? There's a list of countries, and it shows you the happiest to the unhappiest. And
Scandinavia is the highest, isn't it?
I think Finland is the highest. And if you've ever been to Finland, nothing against Finland, but the happiness doesn't strike you as the first thing there when you come. The country also has like a high suicide rate, for example. And I feel like they measure happiness in, you should be happy because you got all those things, right? I don't feel like they measure happiness in the way that, are you actually happy, right? And I feel like it is totally a very different data point to measure, because you rely on what people tell you, right? So you cannot go with some kind of tricorder and say, oh yeah, he's happy.
Happiness meter. Chris?
Yeah, just to add on to that, is it happiness or pleasure? You know, are people saying, oh, you know, I'm happy because I've got this great car and a house and all these things? That has some kind of hierarchical pleasure kind of sense tacked onto it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Norway's got the most Teslas per capita across any country, I believe. But something like every fifth person has a Tesla or something crazy. Every fifth household, something crazy. But certainly when I went there, I can say that was true. There were so many Teslas, it was unreal. And the sovereign wealth fund is doing well in Norway. But about that, Mike, if I was to provide some better metrics for happiness, I'd put, for example, the number of times I've, for example, been frustrated, number of times that I've lost my temper, perhaps in a day, number of times that I've been, sad, miserable, or envious, jealous, anything that takes you away. So, for example, if you're just in a state of equipoise, I'd put that in a happiness category. But if you're anywhere away from that through whatever reason, for example, if you're frustrated at work or frustrated with your manager or your wife or your husband or your children, etc., then that would take you away from the state of equipoise. But equally, I would say, if you were elated at getting a new Tesla, then again, I think that would actually be a cause and a consequence of unhappiness, because even though it may be a temporary, fleeting joy that you had, out of pride, you've suddenly got a Tesla and you're suddenly happy, as opposed to the Peugeot that you may have been driving beforehand. Nothing against Peugeots.
Nobody in America knows what a Peugeot is.
Do they know what a Citroen is, or Renault. They must know Renault. Come on.
Like Fiat. They know Fiat.
Yeah. Anyway, anything that's working class car, then you get my picture. But yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. Like these are quite deep truths. Like misery and elation are essentially two sides of the same coin, and your goal, as Krishna tells Arjuna, is to be in the happy middle ground, like the unwavering lamp in a windless place. And Mike?
Yeah, I think you made two really good points there. I feel like the one being that it's actually our circumstances only have a small proportion of responsibility for our happiness. I would say maybe 10 to 20%. And yet there is a tendency of everybody to blame it all on that, right? But really being happy is, a lot of it is us ourselves wanting to be happy and working towards being happy, making the right choices to be happy. And the second thing that you said about measuring the happiness, like when you have like a moment of strong emotion, a moment of disturbance or something, I feel like this is going to be a whole science in the new age, where we kind of try to figure out, and spirituality will definitely play a big role in this, in my opinion, that all we want is everybody to be as happy as possible and as emotionally sane and healthy as possible and as spiritual as possible.
I think Yogananda talks about happiness in physical form, right? So to be physically healthy, and as well as wealth, as Mike, you said, having some form of wealth to be able to maintain your life. But he said if you don't have your health, you kind of lose your ability to be happy in many respects. So I think that for me is one that's really critical. Like if you don't have a sound body, I think your mind and your emotions suffer as a result. And very difficult to be happy in those modes, and takes a lot of sadhana and discipline to get through those moments of physical discomfort. And if you look at a lot of the world, maybe in the US, Mike, you might say it more, the obesity and things like that, it might then be a root of a lot of unhappiness in the world. So yeah, follow Yogananda's teachings on that one.
Yeah. And if I drove a Peugeot, my happiness would go way down.
We have nothing against French cars on this podcast, of course, but we acknowledge that some cars are more superior than others.
Other cars are available.
I personally like Japanese cars, but I think that's only because Japan's closer to India than Germany. No, just kidding. Persons of interest. This is the last scene, which is shown. So there's a lovely video of Guruji enjoying a banquet with it would appear, some dignitaries, and I believe it is. So I believe it's the ambassador of India. So I found a little snippet of this meal actually from writings from Dr. Lewis, which says, Guruji said, I feel this is the happiest day I've had because that had been accomplished. And so they had a little luncheon at the India House, and the ambassador was there, and the consul general of Asia, and several others, Mr. Sen, and several other members from the Indian embassy. And we had a nice luncheon. So this is like a diary entry from Dr. Lewis. So this would actually be possibly just one day before Guruji's Mahasamadhi. And you can see from the video of him, it is quite similar. His appearance is quite similar to that picture in The Last Smile. Possibly one of three of the most famous pictures of Guruji. The other one is the one at Lake Shrine dedication, I believe, and the other one is the standard pose, which is probably the most iconic image of Guruji. So yeah, that's a bit about that image. We won't talk about the Mahasamadhi scene. That's for a later episode. Mike?
So when he says India House, is that India Hall at Hollywood Temple? Do you know that?
I don't know. That's all I read. But I'll put a link to that talk on our description. It's Dr. Lewis has a big diary entry for Guruji in the last few days, and this was part of it. That's pretty much the whole minute. And unless anyone has any more, I think that was a very beautifully captured minute, and there was a lot there. We unpacked quite a lot of things that you can easily gloss over. Certainly, if you aren't too aware of Indian history or American civil rights movement and perhaps their link. So there's a lot of rich content in there that Guruji picked up upon through his life and writings, and where he actually lectured in Harvard and other places and promoted various things. Also in his articles for the East West magazine, where you'll see lots of entries about his discussions of on things like racism and discrimination and Indian independence and the British Empire and all those glorious and grand subjects that academics and scholars like to mull over their whole lives. Chris?
Yeah, I think this minute did a good job at giving the viewer a good context of what it was like at the time, and brings in nice elements that are tied into Guruji's life. Sunny saying anyone affiliated with India, especially somebody affiliated with Mahatma Gandhi, was a person of interest. Highlighting Yogananda is one of those people. It teased it up very nicely as to what we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes, really, about the paranoia that was there at the time in the United States, but in the Western world. And Philip Goldberg there says, why are people drawn to this heathen teacher? What goes on behind closed doors? So it does. They do a good job at fitting, a lot of context and information in that short minute. So thumbs up to the producers on that one.
Yeah, they took a bit of liberty because they kind of did say 1945 plus minus 20 years. So they took a bit of liberty with narratives, but I think it was fine. That's pretty much everything. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all your comments and lovely feedback. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Ma.